Hello and welcome. We're here today for a fascinating discussion, really pulling back the curtain on some complex global issues. I'm Amy.
And I'm Tom. Today, we're looking at Ukraine, but maybe not in the way you usually hear about it, not just the front lines.
Exactly. We're diving into a surprising internal battle, one that, well, it has major implications for the country itself and for its international partners, too.
And you've sent us some really incredible source material on this, stuff that reveals a side of Ukraine, I think, that's rarely seen in the headlines.
Right. So our mission today is to unpack this recent controversy around Ukraine's anti-corruption efforts. There's a new law, complicated motivations.
And we want to explore what it all means for Ukraine's future, drawing directly from the insights in the material you provided. It's a really critical lens, isn't it, for understanding the true internal dynamics during the war.
Definitely. So, okay, let's unpack this. The material you sent, it highlights this massive outcry recently, protests in Kyiv, Lviv, other cities.
Yeah, huge public reaction. And it was all in response to President Zelensky signing his new law, number 12414.
Okay, so what exactly did this law do? Because, from what we understand, it significantly restricted the autonomy of two key anti-corruption institutions.
That's right. The National Anti-Corruption Bureau, NABU, and the Special Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, SAPO.
And it brought them under the Prosecutor General's direct control.
Essentially, yes. Pulled them right under the PG's office. And, this isn't just some minor bureaucratic reshuffle. The sources stress this is a fundamental change to their independence.
And the reaction was immediate, you said? Visceral, even?
Absolutely. But what's really striking, and what the sources you shared suggest, is that this maybe isn't some moment of madness from Kyiv.
You mean it was calculated?
Looks like it. A calculated chess move. The material argues it's crucial to separate that, the angelic narrative of Ukraine's reform efforts from the often pretty stark reality on the ground.
Right. And speaking of stark reality, the data we reviewed, it actually indicates corruption hasn't decreased during the war.
Quite the opposite, in fact. It seems to have increased and dramatically shifted focus towards the military sector.
Which is worrying. We're talking about significant odd cat kickbacks, bribes, basically.
Yeah, the sources estimate anywhere from 25% to 35% on military contracts.
25 to 35%. Just gone.
As kickbacks. Think about that scale. A quarter to over a third of a contract's value. It really makes you wonder about the true cost, beyond the awful human toll.
And this is happening even while these powerful private companies like drone manufacturers have sprung up. Drone production is up, what, 22-fold since 2022?
Exactly. The money flowing through that sector is just enormous. And with that kind of money, well, the potential for really deep-seated corruption grows too.
So what truly jumped out at me from the sources here is the official line, the narrative from Zelensky's administration.
Ah, yes. How are they framing it?
They're not calling it a crackdown on independent bodies. They're framing it as a fight against corruption, but specifically, corruption tainted by Russian influence.
Russian influence. So they're suggesting MEU and SCPO might be infiltrated by Russian spies.
That's the suggestion, that this law is somehow necessary to, cleanse them.
And what do the sources say about that narrative?
Well, according to the materials we looked at, it's dismissed pretty bluntly as obvious nonsense.
Obvious nonsense.
It seems to be seen as a convenient tool, a way to cancel or discredit opponents, maybe.
That makes sense.
Okay.
The material points out that contacts with Russia were so widespread before the war, you could probably accuse almost anyone with some tiny grain of plausibility. It's an easy pretext.
So, using a familiar tactic, the Russian ties accusation may be to achieve a very different internal goal. Silencing critics, perhaps?
That seems to be the implication. Labeling opponents rather than, addressing the core issues.
Which brings us to the big question, why now? Why enact such a controversial law right in the middle of this brutal war?
That's the key question, isn't it? And what the sources reveal is pretty telling. It seems investigations by NABU had started to touch the direct circle of President Zelensky.
His inner circle. Specifically involving what?
Specifically including companies involved in drone production, that very sector we just talked about.
So this was perceived as a direct threat to his position, his allies.
Potentially, yes. A direct threat.
So if it's not really about Russian infiltration, the sources are suggesting this whole law is basically a political chess move, not a genuine anti-corruption push.
That's the strong suggestion. But what makes it more than just a theory? Is there more concrete evidence in the sources pointing to this?
Well, yeah, the timing is one thing, But there's also some historical context. Apparently, under President Poroshenko, there was this sort of unwritten rule.
An understanding.
Exactly, that these anti-corruption bodies wouldn't investigate the immediate presidential circle. Stay away from the top.
And now they were getting close.
Seems like it. And the material suggests Ukrainian deputies, MPs, many of whom were apparently subject to these MU investigations themselves,
Okay.
and who also allegedly receive monthly envelope money from their faction leaders. You know, unofficial cash payments.
Envelope money.
Right.
Sort of off-the-books funding.
Apparently. So these deputies directly supported the law because they were personally impacted by NIBU's probes. They had a vested interest in limiting its reach.
So it sounds like a sort of shadow economy for politicians, too. A different kind of gray economy right at the top.
That's a fascinating way to put it. And the internal politics this exposed, also quite striking.
You mean Budanov?
Kirill Budanov, yeah. Head of military intelligence. A very powerful figure. His word carries weight. He publicly criticized the law.
He did. What did he say?
Advocated for dialogue instead of new legislation, which, coming from him,
Yeah.
it's seen as a clear challenge to Zelensky.
Wow. Yeah, that indicates a real internal power struggle bubbling up.
Mm-hmm.
Not exactly a unified front, even at the highest levels.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it definitely seems to have international ripples, too.
How so?
The sources point out that NBU particularly was widely seen as having strong influence from the American embassy.
Strong U.S. ties.
So much so that after the law was signed and the SBU, the Ukraine Security Service, tried to enter NBU's offices.
They tried to raid NEB.
Apparently attempted to enter, and NBU's leadership actually requested American intervention. That underscores that direct line, that perceived influence.
And the timing relative to the EU is also interesting, isn't it? This happened after Ukraine had successfully concluded a phase of negotiations with the EU.
That's right. After securing significant concessions, especially on market access for Ukrainian goods, it doesn't seem like a coincidence.
So is Zelensky sort of instrumentalizing Europe's commitment?
That's what the sources suggest. It puts Europe in a really difficult position, doesn't it? A bind.
Yeah, they've built their whole narrative on supporting Ukraine. Withdrawing aid now, even with these anti-democratic steps, it would undermine their own policy.
Their own strict rule of law requirements for EU accession, they might get overlooked for Ukraine.
The war becomes the excuse, maybe. A pragmatic concession, perhaps necessary, but one that really challenges the foundation of EU enlargement policy.
And consider this detail. The new Ukrainian Prime Minister, Swyrydenko.
The one reportedly controlled by Yermak, Zelensky's chief of staff.
That's the one. She's apparently downplayed the severity of corruption, but even more revealing, she negotiated a secret investment treaty with the U.S.
Secret? What kind of leverage does that give Ukraine?
The details aren't public, but the sources frame it as potentially giving Ukraine remarkable leverage over the U.S. It shows a pretty bold, maybe even audacious diplomatic strategy.
But this official stance, downplaying corruption, it must have real consequences on the ground. For soldiers, ordinary people.
Oh, absolutely. The material describes widespread anger, soldiers feeling the direct effects, draft commissions, pocketing money, low-level corruption, hitting basic supplies.
Like that infamous example of paying way too much for eggs for the military.
Exactly that kind of thing. It's not abstract for them. It's tangible. It's in their daily lives.
This picture of ingrained corruption hitting soldiers especially, that raises a huge flag for me. The sources mention public anger, but how does that square with the war effort? Isn't this cynicism just fundamentally dangerous for morale?
It's a crucial question, and the material offers, a nuanced perspective. Yes, there's significant public anger, but it's largely suppressed.
Suppressed. Why?
Because of the overarching need not to lose the war. Everything else becomes secondary, perhaps.
And the sources paint this picture of a very wealthy Ukraine, despite the official stats. How does that work?
It's largely due to the significant gray economy. Many Ukrainians, the material suggests, have learned to live outside formal state structures.
So they bypass the official system.
To a large extent. And here's a counterintuitive idea from the sources. Corruption, in this context, sometimes acts as a substitute for functional state mechanisms.
That's a substitute.
Think of it like this. When official channels fail or are too slow or bureaucratic, people resort to informal payments, the odd cut, maybe not just for illicit gain, but just to get things done.
So it's like greasing the wheels in a system that's seized up.
Sort of. A pragmatic adaptation, maybe? Deeply problematic, of course, but it's how things work. Like, bypassing struggling public services elsewhere by paying for private tutors or private health care.
It's an ingrained system people navigate, That gray economy allows parts of Ukraine to function, maybe even thrive, despite what official numbers say.
Exactly. And maybe the most surprising dimension here is how these internal power struggles connect to much larger global shifts.
You mean the geopolitics?
Absolutely. The material mentions ongoing talks in Istanbul. But also, critically, it references Trump appointing Tom Barrack as ambassador to Turkey with broad powers.
Barrack to Turkey. Why is that significant?
It's seen as indicating a growing U.S. interest in the South Caucasus region and potentially this new transport corridor from China to Europe.
So bigger plays are happening in the background.
Complex maneuvering. And this gives Zelensky significant room to, well, maneuver himself, balancing between the U.S., the EU, Turkey, playing different power centers off each other.
Potentially gaining advantages on the global stage, even while his internal actions might raise eyebrows internationally.
Which also means, according to the sources, that Ukraine, regardless of how the war ends, is likely to remain a, quote, ruthless and difficult partner.
Ruthless, meaning what?
Meaning they'll leverage tactical advantages without much sentiment, pragmatic to the core. The material even cautions that the Ukrainian state might try to corrupt foreign officials or build agent networks abroad.
Wow. That's a stark assessment,
So,
a very hard-nosed approach to international relations.
and Zelensky himself, the sources don't portray him as a crystal clear Democrat. There are accusations of authoritarian tendencies, wanting a hand-controlled democracy.
So quite a complex picture emerging then. Ukraine isn't just battling Russia externally.
It's grappling with these profound internal power struggles, systemic corruption.
And all while playing this very shrewd, very complex geopolitical game on the international stage.
Which really raises an important question for you, our listener. The challenge for Ukraine, it seems, isn't just about winning the war, is it?
No. It's also about building a state where its own citizens can actually trust its institutions.
And where other nations can engage based on, well, shared values, ideally, not just cold, hard calculation and leverage.
This ongoing tension, this internal push and pull alongside the external war, it's undoubtedly going to define Ukraine's future.
Thank you for your attention. You can subscribe our podcast if you like it.
See you next time.